All right, hey guys, my name is Matthew Morrison, aka Level. I'm going to be breaking down for you my track Diam'n, which came out on StoryTime Records compilation album, most recent one. This one was a lot of fun to make. It was also probably one of the easiest tracks that I've ever made in my life from a mixing and mastering process. So I'll have a lot of fun breaking this one for you guys, breaking this one down for you guys, and I hope you learned something at the same time. So let me move my camera down here. Okay, just put that right there. All right, so let's just start with the intro. Pretty simple stuff for now. So pretty simple, not much, just a filtered kick that I have going on for now. Like it's filtered and then it comes in at the buildup basically. I also have my groups settled, like I had my kick drum or my kick and my drums up at the top. I'll explain my thought process behind it later. And then I have essentially the kick also right at the top, right next to the bass. Good rule of thumb is I think you should also always have these two together, considering the most important part usually in house is how do the kick and the bass sound together. So, you know, having them right together just makes it easier to kind of get to understand the relationship more. Next, we've got all of our leads. That includes the main lead of the track, some of the build synths that I use, and then some other miscellaneous stuff. Then we've got the drums. Those are things like the hats, the claps, perks. Then we've got our vocals and its own separate bus. And then finally, we have our effects and like the ear candy bits at the very end. And then going back to the top, kick and drum. It's important to have the kick and drum in the same kind of channel, just because it is essentially a drum, the kick, but it's so important to kind of be its own thing that I kind of like just having the kick at the top. And then I also just have, you'll see this probably in the track, there's other channels that are just turned off, and that's probably just because I'm old instruments that I tried and didn't use, but maybe if I would like them a little bit enough and wanted to come back to them, I would just keep them there, not delete them, because I'm pretty lazy. So I just ended up with this one. This is excellent. This is from their Tech House kit called Dumb Kick 2. Not much processing on this at all. A bit of a smile EQ, cutting out some sub and boosting the transients around 100 hertz, and then a big dip around the 300 below. Next, we have our hats. These kind of stay the same throughout the entire track with maybe some filtering going on. So listen to these. Yeah, nothing too much. We have kind of our mono hat, and it's very short closed hat right here. Simple stuff. Then we have our open hat right here. Not much process, and there's no processing on that one at all. But for the hats group, I do like to put a little bit of distortion on there. So this is a Filter Saturn. This is a great distortion plugin for kind of adding extra harmonics without like increasing the, I guess, volume. So it doesn't really overpower the rest of the track, but it still keeps in a really solid place. And then some Pro Q as well, just to dip some maybe harsh frequencies, although it is doing quite a bit. Something around 4 dB. So not too much going on there. We got the claps then next, a bit more going on here. So generally with claps, I kind of like to structure it in 3 different ways. I learned this from John Summit, and I think it's one of the best explanations for kind of layering drums I've ever heard. For claps, at least, you kind of always want one that's right in the middle. So I think that's this Taiki New Light one. The most overused clap in bass house, but it's really so good for a reason. That's one, that's kind of my mono clap, and that's what I use as that one. Then we've got this one. I'm not sure where this one comes from. Probably a splice pack. Let's see. So that's a bit more kind of like a textural, a bit weird sounding. And then we've got our wide layer right here. Left and right, you can hear it. Very wide. So that's kind of the way I like to think about claps. I won't always do it. Sometimes I'll add 4. Sometimes it'll just be 2. It really depends. But generally when I'm making drum patterns or claps in this case, I always like to keep it around that texture layer, mono, and wide kind of layer. So for the processing on the drums, some Pro Q kind of to boost certain areas and dip certain ones out. And then a glue compressor. I usually always put a glue compressor on my kick, or not on my kick, sorry, my claps, just to kind of, as it says, kind of glue them together and make sure they're all not all maybe overpowering or one's overpowering the other. And then some more saturation as well. This gentle saturation is extremely good. I think I bought Filter Saturn just for this. It's just such a good tool to add loudness without actually adding loudness. It's really good. And then kind of a little more EQing just to really shape the sound. I guess this is probably just to add transients right here. Yep. Pro Q3 is a really good tool. I recommend anybody who wants to really get into production that should be one of the first plugins that you ever get. All right, and then going to perks, just some random hits going on here. This loop, I think I maybe chopped up a little bit. Actually, no, I didn't at all. And then we've got a rim going on, rim shot hits going on right here as well. So not much going on. And then we can get into the vocals a bit. I'll probably get more into it on the build, actually, is what I'll do. So we'll save that for the build part. And then some FX, probably just some sweeps, sub sweep, and then another sweep probably. Having stuff like that really adds impact to like the next phrases essentially in a song. So I use those a lot. You'll see that in this track too. Okay, so next up we have the kind of where a lot of the elements come through. So and it kind of repeats until it goes into the build. So the bass, we can kind of go over that here because it doesn't really change throughout the track. So I made this bass myself. I usually don't do much sound design. I've gotten better at it over time. But this one, and I don't know how this one came through because it's the weirdest patch I think I've ever made, and one of the dumbest too. So it's just a regular sine waves, regular sine 808 type of pattern with this filter, the amplitude filter, I think. Very short tail, zero sustain, short decay. We've also got a bit of, what is it, LFO on the coarse pitch, just kind of adds more flavor, I guess, to the overall bass. And then we've got a filter kind of with a lot of resonance up here just to kind of boost that, because I don't like it on 808s when it's just sub. I do like some resonances past that. So that's kind of why I have that part. And then the part where I say when it gets really dumb is in the FX. So this distortion, diode 1, it's probably my favorite distortion to use on sine waves, whether it is basses like this or just maybe plucks. Diode 1's really good when used on sine waves in particular. I'm not sure why, but it's worked at a lot of times. It's made some really cool and interesting sounds. But the part that I look back on this track when I made it and I don't understand why I came to this was this Combs filter right here. I don't know why. It just really worked out when I was making this track to put a Combs filter on it, which is, if for those who don't know, a Combs filter is used a lot in things like dubstep because there's a lot of different resonances across the filter, which make it really, really weird in all honesty. But it just worked for this one. And then we've got an EQ to kind of shove off any of the mids or any of the highs. So for the most part, that's what's going on. And then there's not much processing going on after that. So there's a bit of glue compression to kind of give it more of an attack, more of that transient at the very beginning. So there's that. We've got a bit of saturation here, not much. Then we've got more fab filter. I think it's the gentle saturation again. Pro multiband dynamics, just boosting the sub. I don't even know why I have that there actually. And then a compressor here to catch any peaks that might happen. And then finally a shaving EQ, maybe of some of the resonances, more sub boosting and things like that. So it's not too much going on here. And then we have our kickstart. I use this a lot for sidechaining the kick to the bass, although I also have LFO tool if I need to be super surgical in that case. And then we have an auto filter here, gain being automated just in case they need to for things like build and stuff like that. And then a Pro Q. I actually don't know why this is. I guess this is just, again, to cut some resonances and boost the sub again, sub transients also. So that's really all that's going in the bass. Usually we'll have maybe one or two more as like layers, but this was really all I needed for this one. So was super happy with that. We have our main lead here, which we'll get to in the drop. We kind of have this break lead that I used, preset. I usually will take a preset and try to tweak it a little bit and then process it after, usually OTT, then an EQ. Same thing with Saturn as well, using some warm tape only on that, or no, okay, only gentle saturation on the highs. Interesting. And then we'll have Valhalla Room as well, just to give it some space. Great reverb plugin, would definitely recommend. And then build drums. Okay, they're pretty quiet. I think those come into the build, so let me keep this. So this right here, this random piece, it's just a reverb tail. To make one of those, you essentially put a reverb or a ton of reverb on one of your instruments, play it back. Kind of in this case, you would open up a new audio channel, resample it, put the bunch of reverb on here, and then kind of play that back. You basically get an audio clip, and then from that audio clip, you just reverse it, cut the part where there's no like the note's not actually playing. So in this case, it'd be like right here. So it'd be playing, and then there's a big reverb tail right there. So you just take that, reverse it, and you put it back here. And that's kind of how I got that reverb tail. I love using those on vocals and sometimes leads like here as well. So nothing crazy going on that one. What's next? And then drums being the same. Yeah, nothing much going on. All right, so let's get into the build. Oops. All right, so that's kind of where the drones come into play. So a lot of these are, I think, are just presets. This one, I guess, I made on my own, just a saw wave, or I guess I think it's a triangle. I'm actually not sure. I think it's a triangle wave. Distortion, some reverb, EQ, more filtering, things like that. Super simple, nothing crazy. But I layered a lot of these. So there's this one that I made. It's also really quiet. As well as I noticed, I actually don't think I can even hear it in the actual track. Another one that you can't hear as well. Okay, this is going great. This one you can hear a little bit more in Dark Swarm. This is probably like an Ableton sound ambient if I had to take a guess. Yeah, right there. Interesting. And then we got another one. You can hear that one a lot more. So just a bunch of ambient kind of presets and noises. And then we've got an audio track that's just not being used. It's great. And then a sine wave, kind of keep that sustained sub going along the whole point. It kind of helps fill out the frequency spectrum, especially when it's empty. So this is one thing I like to do in builds a lot when I feel like there's no bass going on and it feels really empty. Sometimes I'll just add a straight sub layer, not like much processing and not make it too loud, but just kind of keep it consistently like kind of low like that. And then I think that's it. Okay, so we can now get into the vocal actually. So a couple things going on this vocal chain. So first, little alter boy. This is kind of what I like to use to change the pitch and the formants. Because if I didn't, it would sound like this. So we'll do that, and then we'll bypass. So it kind of just makes it a bit higher in tones. I like to use that. It's a pretty popular one. I would recommend people use it as well. And then, okay, we'll just go by each one by one. So little alter boy has this neat little quirk about it where whenever you use it on anything, it likes to essentially turn whatever piece of music or whatever track that you're working on, whenever you input little alter boy on it, it likes to put it out of phase for some reason. And it's a great stupid feature that little alter boy has. So what you should always do, what I recommend at least, is use your little alter boy at the beginning and then put a mono utility. This is just for Ableton. I'm not sure how FL or Logic people do this, but put a mono right after and then widen the sound from there if you want to, so that you don't get any really bad phase issues, because it happens with this plugin for some reason. Next, we got some strict carvings, so cutting out all the lows and some highs. And then the biggest contributor to this whole thing is something called the West End vocal processing. If you go online to West End's YouTube channel, you will see, I think, a tutorial that he has about a couple of tracks, which are really great pieces of information about how he works. It's I would really recommend you guys go watch that as well. He essentially built this vocal processing rack, and I kind of just stole the whole thing. I think it's a great, it was a really great, simple, all Ableton stock plugins, only vocal processing rack, and I've just used it in a couple other tracks. It's great to use for that. We have some decapitator, just a little bit of distortion, mix in some edge, I think is the preset that I used. That house effect, I use this a ton. You essentially, it widens the sound of whatever you're using, so it's going to widen this whole thing. So if I play it with it, and then if I play it without,
I gave diamond rings, expensive than everything.
it's so much more mono. It's like a night and day difference. But you kind of want to alter this dry wet knob here to take into account things like if it's too out of phase, you kind of want to make it or adjust it to get the right balance. All right, so next is Valhalla room reverb. Which one is this? Just a regular medium ambience reverb, nothing crazy going on there. Compressing it again heavily, it seems. Yeah, just making sure to catch those peaks. Another Pro Q3, a lot of going on here, calming the mids, some resonances probably around 4K, and then calming those highs again, really compressing them again. Another Pro Q, bringing back those highs. I'm not entirely sure why I did that, but I guess it worked at the time. And then let me move this. Another compressor, kind of more lenient, just making sure there's no really harsh peaks coming through. And then probably should have put this at the end, but this is a weird free plugin. It's a de-esser basically, so it kind of gets rid of those harsh syllables. And I think where I got this sample from, it had like a pretty rough textures to it, and so kind of getting rid of those harsh frequencies around that 6K, 10K, 2K hertz area was probably why I think I use this. And then a little audio effects rack, so that's like filtering gain if I needed to, and then I guess I took out some width as well right there. So that's pretty much all for the vocals. You kind of just, as you go along, I like to mix as I go along, so I'm not like one to finish a whole arrangement of a track out and then I mix. I like to kind of mix as I go along, because I don't want to listen to something that sounds bad even though the arrangement is good and fine. I like to kind of fine tune as I go along, and so that's kind of how I went about this process as well. All right, so that's my vocals. Vocal Bus also has things like huge reverbs like bass clef, easy washout. Would recommend this to anybody on Ableton. I've used this in probably every single track that I've made on tons of channels. This is my favorite thing ever, honestly. I love this washout. Would definitely recommend. A delay and then a filter, but that all gets automated throughout the track as well. Okay, but let's get to some of the percussion. So just kind of a break beat, nothing crazy here. Probably just found it from Splice. Okay, and then yeah, some more textures. Goes into the build, and then let's go into kind of the second, or I guess the second part of the build. Okay, so yeah, just more FX, probably a sub drop. I use those a lot. I love them. Then a white noise, more downlifters. Snare build, common. Chopping up the vocal so it's constantly repeating. Stuff like that, building tension. And then the drones, just kind of on their last parts. I don't even know if they're playing. Oh, and I just realized one of these are off. So one of these I showed you is just not even part of the track. Okay, let's get to the lead, because this is kind of the thing that really, I first heard this kind of go on in the track and I just knew this was going to be a hit. So let's see, in the build, tons of reverb, there's filters all over it. So it's kind of building tension. So one good practice to have in house when you're building tension up to the drop is to kind of lead in whatever the main element of the drop is going to be. So it can be the bass. That's a really common one. I've done that a lot. But I like to do the lead with a ton of reverb and some filtering on it, maybe a different pattern also, just so the listener can kind of get a sense of what's going on before the actual drop. So it kind of prepares them. Because you usually, for house music, you don't want to be super random with a ton of stuff. You kind of want to make it a little bit predictable, so it's just easier to dance to. So that's kind of how I went about this. But let's get into the actual, let's get into the drop itself. I'll show you how I did all that.
I gave Diam'n rings.
All right, so the kick, bass, they're all the same. Nothing has really changed from the original kind of build over here. So all we really need to go into is maybe some added drums, maybe some added perks, and then this lead. So this lead's probably where I'm going to talk about a majority of the kind of like sound design, where that goes. So let's see. This is what it sounds like on its own. So yeah, pretty, you can even see from this MIDI, this is an absolutely insane MIDI, which actually we can talk about right now. The way that I made this MIDI, I didn't write any of this. So it's pretty acidy in its style. It's very quick. It's very fast. The way that kind of acid house, I think in the 90s or 80s, maybe when it was really kind of popular, was. So the way that I made this, and I hope I actually have it up. Okay, great. So this thing that Ableton has is called Max for Live. It's essentially like another thing for plugins, but it's much less CPU intensive. It can be placed kind of right into the Ableton audio like effects or MIDI effects rack. And so basically what this does is it writes MIDI based on how complex or not complex you kind of want it. So it says from Manchester to Detroit within the swing of a dial. So I wonder if I can actually show it here. Perfect. So as you can kind of see, it's playing like random MIDI, just randomly. You can play it again and play the same thing, but the more you adjust the density, the more complex it'll be. So if I make it on like max, so it's just, that's kind of how I got the layer. This is just a basic triangle wave also. You can do you can transpose it up 6 semitones. You can make it really swingy, make the length longer. But that's kind of what I did. I actually had it right here. So I had the swing on 65, the density I think was right here. And that's kind of how this MIDI kind of came about. And so actually, when you listen to it also without the kickstart on the whole channel, it kind of sounds really, like really bad. Like, let me show you guys actually if I can. So if I just turn off the sidechain that I have on the whole lead bus, or the main lead bus that I have here. Oh, whoops. So it's really messy and it's kind of gross, honestly, which is, I think I got really lucky when I made this that I had kickstart already on this, like on this effect. So I got pretty lucky that it ended up not only working out really well with this sidechain, because the sidechain itself is pretty deep. This is like a really deep cut for kind of bass house. So I got really lucky with the way that it kind of sounds. The MIDI itself also, it's it's super swingy. Like the only things that are really on the grid are the very first beats of each measure. So like this right here, there's one right there, one right there. But like everything else is pretty off the grid for the most part. So that really gives it like a feeling of swing, which is really important when you're making house music in general, whether bass, tech, deep, kind of having that swing is super important. But okay, let's get into the actual MIDI, or not the MIDI, the actual instrument itself. So this is a preset. I typically would, at this kind of, when I made this track, would take presets and then kind of change the way that they sound, whether it's the filters or the effects, just a little bit. I didn't want to change too much. So I also have pitch bends, changing the chaos probably. And then I don't know, but I think I just changed really the filter of this one, which honestly didn't do too much. The external processing is kind of what makes it all really good, in all honesty. So let me get the empty tracks out of here. Okay, so real quick, we'll go piece by piece with each one, because it kind of, each one really does add a lot to the grittiness of the track. So without any external processing, which one? Sorry. So super quiet. I can't even hear it actually. So the first thing I usually do when I'm making new instruments is I'll put on OTT always. This is the best thing since sliced bread. I'm not even kidding. I love OTT. It's so good at bringing out frequencies that weren't even there to begin with of any track. It's so good. So already a huge difference, very transient. You can really hear it. The mids kind of come through as well, but it's a bit harsh, which we'll get to later. A little bit of redux, which is basically just a downsampler. Let's see. Now we go to Camel Crusher, British Clean. This is a really good free distortion plugin. British Clean is one of the best distortions out there. I think you can ask any artist and they'll say the same thing. British Clean is one of the best things. One of the best distortion presets ever. So it's getting louder, adding more harmonics, basically. Clean tube saturation from Saturn. Really sounds like it's starting to kind of become more full in its sound, which is really important also right there. And then we get into some EQing, so just cutting out the lows. RC Retro 20, also pretty good, adding some vinyl textures and some more distortion. That we have some bit of compression, actually a lot. Surprised actually. House effect. This is kind of what takes it to the next level. Again, I love using this thing. Just make sure you don't add too much, or else it'll start to go out of phase. You should always just check that. I always have a thing at the end here, a little utility button that I like to check. So sounds good in stereo, but in mono, sounds all right. Actually, it could be better, but you know, hindsight, 2020 and all that. And then we have some delay, which is just being automated, so probably at certain points throughout the track. Some more compression, Pro Q, boosting the highs and cutting probably some harsh resonances. And then some reverb. This is being automated, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so the mix is being reverb. I'll show that one later on as well, what that one will do. And yeah, there's really not much that goes on. It's a lot of trial and error with these kinds of things in these instruments. And then I kind of have a second layer that's really quiet. I don't even think I needed to add it. There's not much going on. Super quiet, like not really doing much, in all honesty. Okay, so the drums still the same. Nothing has really changed. This is all exactly the same, basically. So let's see the fills. Oh yeah, I didn't add that. I don't know why that's there. I didn't have a phone. A little breathe kind of uplift. I like to use that a lot. And then a white noise. I like to put that right on the clap, on the first kick, and then the first hat is usually where I put this white noise. It kind of gives a bigger impact to that first clap. That's why I like to use it a lot. I use it in probably every track that I've made so far. It's one of my things I like to use a lot. So yeah. Nothing really going on. Let's see the second drop if anything really changes. All right, so yeah, there's a couple things I added. So 2 new layers basically right here. Really wide, pretty harsh as well. I probably could have tamed those a bit better. Another preset. Don't feel ashamed to use presets. Just try and edit them to make them sound as best as you can. And at the end of the day, no listener is going to go and say, oh, that's the evolution of sound preset metal. Like, nobody's going to do that. So don't worry about using presets. Nobody really, the average listener just does not care. And then kind of an acidy preset right here. That's pretty quiet if I remember too. Just to kind of add more layers, add more depth, switch it up a little bit on the second drop too. And then let's see, on the drums, we added this. I love reverse, these are reverse cymbals. I love using these a lot in some of my tracks. The way I think about it usually is you either add a shaker kind of to the second part of the drop or the third part, and that's kind of your added drum layer, or you add a reverse cymbal instead. Those are usually the two that I like to use a lot. And I think they kind of change up the hats a bit and make them fresh. And then probably things like to the side, like panned, more percussion. I think, did I add anything more? No. Yeah, this is a lot simpler usually than some of my other tracks, but it's one of my best ones. I really like this one a lot. Vocal kind of brings it into the second part of the drop. Having good transition elements is super important. So snare drops or snare fills and things like that. Then I added this little kind of hit right here on some of the hats, every bar. So just a little like a little yell with some OTT and probably some Pro Q, adding to the mids and cutting out some of the highs. And crazy. And then I think I also remember because I automate it right there. Yeah, that's another thing also that I would recommend is automate a ton, just to kind of not keep it so, if you ever notice your tracks are kind of stale and kind of not really moving much, but all of your elements are kind of typical. Like, I don't add a ton of stuff throughout here, but I automate a lot as I go on to kind of keep the listener like engaged. I think that's also really important as well. So let me see if there's anything else. Little dropout right there. It's always nice to kind of switch it up. Oh, that is not what it was supposed to be last time. Oh, I didn't turn this on. No wonder. Sorry about that. So that was the room, the Valhalla room I was talking about. That's one of the probably my favorite parts of this track, is this kind of part right here. That kind of space right there where it's just reverb, kind of in that wheel. Stuff like that I love to do in tracks. And then it kind of helps because it builds into the next section as well. Of course, automating things like bass clefs washout, I have that everywhere. It's so good. Can't recommend it enough. And then, yeah, we're kind of faltering out. And honestly, that's basically the whole track. There's really not much that changes in the second drop, except kind of keeping the things different, automating maybe different parts, bringing in different sounds. There's really not that much that changes. I guess we can go into the second build though. Oh yeah, I changed up the vocal a bit here, so I add this part. It's kind of the same thing from up here, but this is just another part of that same vocal. Continuing to build tension, things like that. New effects, so new risers. Somebody screaming. I don't know why I added this. I don't know why I added that, but that is so funny. And then sub drop, really good for fake outs too. And then kind of another sub that rises, things like that. Yeah, because I do a fake out on this first drop, which I love. And then right back into it. It's the same thing. I usually would try to change up things on the second drop at least a little bit, without just a fake out. But I think for this one, it really worked. Just kind of going straight back into it. I think the only thing I changed here is this pattern. Yeah, that's basically it. And then just right here, just kind of building more tension as we go into the part where there's everything combined. Yeah, that. Actually, I did add something. Where was it? It's like this. Where'd it go? Oh yeah, this I think it was just a delay that I added on this channel. It was just this, and then I automated the panning, so I'm going all over the place. But I mean, yeah. Oh, and that's just a reverb tail from this to add more suspense going into when it finally hits and everything. Yeah, and then there's really nothing much else. It's kind of the same thing going on here. And then I think on the last part, there's. Oh, I do add some shakers. So I do both the reverse cymbal and then the shakers as well. I don't know. There's really not much that changed in the second part, honestly. It was a really simple track to make. It was a lot of fun. I guess quickly I can kind of go over my master chain. This changes every single track. Also, I don't really have a set master chain. So, but I do like to keep it similar in terms of have a pre-master. So that's things like bass clefs, easy washout, so affects the whole track, having a utility, bring down certain aspects of the track. So if I like click here, there are parts like during builds where it's quieter, just so that when it actually hits the drop, it's really impactful, that kind of change in volume. A bit of Pro Q just to kind of clean things up, a lot more mid-side aspects, so it's not just make it too stereo. Things like that, really small changes as well. Pro multiband, just to bring out more of the mids of the track. And then we have Ozone. I like to use this quite a bit. I'll usually use the same thing, so an imager to kind of make sure my sub is completely in mono. Anything from 150 and below has to be mono, or else it's just going to sound awful on stereos when you play it out live. Next, we have, I guess, the 150 to 1K range, the mid side. And then we have our high mids and then our high highs, basically. And then this is kind of like widening those different aspects. And for this one, I guess I only needed to widen the high highs. Then we have an exciter. This kind of just is more distortion that's added to certain aspects of those same bands, those same frequency bands that I use. Dynamics, this is a really light compressor that's just meant to catch like really bad peaks. So if I like play it during the drop right here. It's moving, but really, really slightly. It's not like doing a ton. And then a maximizer. I use this transient mode right here. I don't remember who I heard it from, but there's a lot. I think this transient mode is a really good part of Ozone in terms of like limiting and getting the most out of the sound in your mastering process. And then some Pro L2, just to cap it off again, only adding 2 dB. Nothing crazy. And then for kind of monitoring the sound, I like to use a mix of Spam. I think, I don't remember exactly the reasoning behind this, but I just know when a track is fully mastered, hitting things like -6 dB, you essentially, during a drop, you kind of don't want any of your elements to consistently be going above this -30. That's from what I remember, because then it starts to become a little too harsh to a person's ear and kind of can take over the entire track in not very good way. That's essentially what I use this for. And then I have a Pro Q. Similar reasoning, just to make sure all the levels are similar, nothing's kind of overpowering in a way. And then a loudness meter again, just to check if it's hitting that -6, which is kind of what I target during my drops. It's usually what sounds best. You can sometimes go lower as well, something like -5. And then a utility, it's just -8 for the sake of the video. But yeah, that's basically it. I don't do much processing on the individual groups that much. Usually if I do, it's things like automations. Like on the drums, I have this easy filter that kind of will take out some of the highs during the builds and things like that. Or things like this, same thing, leads. I guess a bit, yeah, and this is just like a monitoring for the Pro Q3 and kick as well, probably the bass as well. Yeah, nothing much like going on. This is a pretty simple track. And it's easily one of my favorites. I hope you guys enjoyed. I had a lot of fun going through this track again. It had been a while since I last opened this project up, and it was really exciting to see this one again. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys got something out of this.